off the Bay of Banderas, which is behind me in Mexico, Puerto Vallarta to be exact, the new part of Puerto Vallarta. I'm on a little bit of vacation, but I wanted to do a show today because I've got a great guest for you. I'll tell you about him in just a moment. You are going to hear a story that you probably won't believe from our guest. He's written a new book, and I'll introduce you to him in just a moment. But what I wanted to do is, I don't know much about Mexican wines, so I've been here a few days, and I've gone in a couple of wine stores and talked to some people, and I've enjoyed a couple of Mexican wines. I am surprised to know that when you think of Mexico, you generally think of beer or tequila or mezcal, but they have a very robust grape growing and wine producing community here in Mexico that is getting larger by the day. Now, as comparison, the average American drinks 2 gallons of wine a year. The average Mexican drinks I've got the number here. 950 milliliters of about 0.3 gallons a year. By comparison, France drinks, the average French person drinks 15 gallons of wine a year. At any rate, since I'm coming to you from Puerto Vallarta, I thought it might be appropriate to sample a Mexican wine and I've been, as I say, very surprised by the quality. I actually had this the other night, so I brought a bottle to have here. This is, well, first of all, Mexican wines are made from many of the varieties we know: Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, Chardonnay. The largest growing, there are about, I think, 19 official grape growing regions in Mexico, the largest being just south of California. I got a bottle that is said to be from the oldest winery in the Americas, of all the Americas. That includes the United States, of course. It's from Casa Madero. It's called 3V. It costs about $19 here. And it's a meritage blend, as we would call it in the States. It's a blend of Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and Tempranillo, which is a wine we certainly grow in California and elsewhere and around the world, but it is most commonly associated with Spanish wines. It's a great big red, I can tell you, because I've tasted it, but I'm going to show you the color of it now, and we'll try it. I have a little Mexican wine here. This is a 2018, so it's fairly young. It's a brownish red. I mean, in fact, when I first poured it, I thought, oh, it must be 15 years old or so, because red wine sometimes gets brownish around the side of your glass. But it's a brownish red. It's young at 2018, and it is really good. I had it with some spicy food. I'm in Mexico, what the heck? And it stood up to it perfectly. So it's a great thing to have, obviously, with meats, the usual things you would have Cabernet Sauvignon for, and other stuff. So I don't know how readily available Mexican wine is in the United States, but believe me, I'm going to work on finding out. And I'll let you know what I find. Let me introduce you to our guests. Let me tell you this, first of all. As you know, we've been doing this for almost a year, and we talk about a lot of different ways to travel. And today we're going to hear an incredible but true story of folks who travel to treasure hunt. Now, you may think treasure hunting is something from long ago, and you're right, it is. The Greeks, everybody treasured. The Greeks treasure hunted. The pirates treasure hunted when they knocked off Spanish ships carrying gold and silver from the old world to the new world. Museums all over the world have treasure hunted. Museums are filled with stuff that's not theirs, from the Middle East, from Asia, from Africa, from South America. Whoops, almost knocked over the wine. Not a good thing to do. But my next guest knows a whole lot about treasure hunting, but it's very specific. We're going to focus on a very unique treasure hunt that was started by a Santa Fe-based art and antiquities dealer named Forrest Fenn, F-E-N-N. About 11 years ago, after being told that he was going to die of cancer, Forrest Fenn filled a treasure chest, a small treasure chest, not a massive pirate-sized one, but a very one that can hold about $1 million worth of gold and silver coins and jewels, and I had a whole list of stuff. And I'll introduce you to Dan Barbarisi, who's the author of the book, in just a moment. You see him on your right there. This is a book about it, coming out in about 2 weeks. You can pre-order it now on Amazon. He filled this treasure chest with a bracelet studded with rubies, emeralds, and diamonds, and what else did he put in there? He put in a Mayan gold bracelet, some gold coins. The value of this loot, some jade figurines. The value of this loot is probably a little less than $1 million or a little more than $1 million. And he then wrote a book and he printed about 1,000 copies and wrote a short poem that contained the clues to finding where he buried that treasure chest, somewhere in the Rocky Mountains, maybe sort of Colorado, New Mexico. Anyway, that set off a modest search of people wanting to cash in on the million. But then he went on the Today Show and the thing exploded. And by the way, he didn't die of cancer. He only died last year. So he made it another 10 years. Dan Barbarisi is the author of the book about this incredible saga. He didn't just do a book. He lived it. He became... I'll ask him in just a moment whether he intended to become a treasure hunter in the beginning, but he certainly did become one. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rudy. Pleasure to be here.
The book is called Chasing the... I'm sorry, I have notes here, and I'm Chasing the Thrill. And it's Chasing the Thrill is a fascinating account of folks who ruined marriages, lost all the money they had, lost their jobs in a quest to find this stash. Dan, welcome to the show again. Tell us a little introduce us to Mr. Fenn.
Yeah, honestly, Rudy, you did a pretty good job of kind of laying out the basics there, but there is definitely more, under the surface of him. He was an ex-fighter pilot who kind of became an art dealer to the stars in Santa Fe in the 70s and 80s, and then, as you said,
shot down in Vietnam twice, right?
Shot down twice. That's right. Had to do some really death-defying, hair-raising escapes from the jungles out there. With shells falling and Vietnamese soldiers looking for him. So he has lived some lives, and he was a very interesting guy. The kind of person who really made friends everywhere and knew how to cultivate relationships with very famous people. Presidents, things like that. He had a very, very interesting world that he lived in Santa Fe. And but in the late 80s, he was told that he was going to die. Essentially, he had a 1 in 5 chance of living. He had a tumor on his inferior vena cava, not a good place to have one, and he thought that was the end of it. And he was in his study with his friend Ralph Lauren, the designer, and Lauren wanted to buy one of his pieces off him. And Fenn said, no, I don't want to sell it to you. And Lauren said, Forrest, you can't take it with you. And he said, well, what if I can? And he kind of hatched this plan where he thought about how he might actually take his wealth and take it out into the wilderness with him at a special spot, a spot that was only, valuable and important to him, and hide it there and literally lie down and die next to it. Now, he ended up surviving, as you said. The cancer did not kill him, but the idea stayed with him. And so for the next 20 years, he actually worked on cultivating that treasure chest, putting things in it, taking things out, making it even better and bigger. Yes.
Can I interrupt you, Dan? Did you say he spent 20 years filling that chest?
Mm-hmm. That's right. From 1988-ish to 2010 when he actually went and hit it.
Whoa.
So it changed.
I missed that. I missed that detail. I didn't remember that detail. By the way, I just finished Dan's book last night. Read in 2 days. Couldn't put it down. I was reading it online. I couldn't put it down. Unbelievable. A very exciting book and a fascinating story. Go ahead, Dan. Okay, so
Thank you, Rudy. I appreciate that.
Filling up that chest.
Yeah, so he spent 20 years filling it up, and then he writes, as you said, this memoir, this book that has a poem in it. And if you can follow the 9 clues in the poem, it will lead you to the treasure. So in 2010, as you said, he takes this thing out somewhere in the wilderness, out in the Rocky Mountains, and leaves it there. And he goes back to his house. He doesn't die with it, fortunately. And he announces to the world that this is happening. And then, as you said, it starts to pick up steam over a little while. And then around 2013, it really explodes with that Today Show appearance. And this whole community builds around it. And it becomes, a real worldwide phenomenon. And so, that's not all that long after that is where I kind of picked up on this thing and said, oh, my God, there is an incredible story here. I want to get into it. I want to tell it. I want to live the lives of these people and explain how and why they do what they do as they are part of this insane treasure hunting adventure that I was shocked even existed at all.
Well, let me just give a little of your background, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. You were a reporter with the Providence Journal, then you were a sports reporter for the Wall Street Journal, and you now live outside Boston with your 2 sons and your wife. And
that's generally correct, yeah.
You write for a sports is it a sports website now?
Yes, The Athletic, big national, international sports website. So I'm actually a senior editor there. I don't write as much anymore, but same idea.
Well done. As a writer myself, I hate writing.
Yes, I know your history, so I know you get it. And it's fun to do different things as you move along, right?
It is. Okay, so how did you get into the Forrest Fenn world?
Yeah, so the last book I did came out in 2017, a book called Dueling with Kings, about the crazy daily fantasy sports world, DraftKings and FanDuel, when that was all blowing up. So we did kind of like a little bit of a gonzo adventure where I went into that thing and lived in that world and became one of like the grand champions in that, and actually ended up becoming the fantasy hockey world champion of all things. So the guy who, I have a whole giant check and a belt. It's a whole thing. Anyway, the guy who mentored me in that and kind of took me through that world, we became friends, and he was the one who discovered this thing, and he started kind of got me into this. And he said, Dan, have you heard of the treasure of Forrest Fenn? And I said, I have no idea what you're talking about. This was in early 2017. But he basically explained the basics to me. And after that point, I was just hooked. I mean, I couldn't believe this story hadn't been told in book form yet. But more than that, I wanted to go play treasure hunter. I wanted to go out and look for this thing and experience that. So, from the beginning, I just decided, okay, I'm going to go capture the story of this world. I'm going to try to tell what it's like to be one of these people, and I will try to live in this thing and understand it, from the inside, and be able to then relate it to the outside world.
So you were wearing two hats. You were wearing a journalist hat, and you were sort of becoming, you became a treasure hunter along with your friend who brought you into this world. Now, first of all, you had no idea whether this would ever be found in Fenn's lifetime or your lifetime, for that matter. No. You didn't know if there was going to be an ending that we could all be satisfied with. No. But did you have any idea how many people would become so passionate and so willing to sacrifice so many other parts of their life in search of this, in hunting this down?
Yeah, well, that part, that's what really intrigued me was what this made people do. The box is a box. It's interesting, but it sits out there on its own, it's got treasure in it. That's great. But what really appealed to me was what this drove people to do, and to understand why this captured them so, and, what it does and speaks to in all of us. What is the universal thing that everybody wants to go find a hidden treasure? Why is that? Does it bring you back to your childhood? Does it, validate you in some way? There's a lot of reasons why people go searching for it, and a lot of them I found were somewhat universal. So yeah, but that said, to your other point, no, when I started the book, I did not expect it to be found. I had to assume it would not be found during the lifetime of the book. And you had to kind of plan for that. And then, yes, I don't know how much we're giving away here in terms of your show and what you want to progress along. But yes, when it ultimately was found, that required a tremendous amount of reworking, but was ultimately a very good thing for me in the end.
But when you started, it had been hidden for 7 years, right?
Yes, it was hidden for 7 years, and it could have been hidden for 70 more or 700 more. Exactly.
Well, I think one of the things you're saying interesting about this is that when you tell anyone the story first, they go, oh, everybody wants to get $1 million. But it becomes much larger than that. Their egos get wrapped up in this. They have feuds. They have formed alliances that break apart or come back together with other people. People give people wrong clues. They have Fenoramas. No,
Fenbury.
Fen, what is it?
Fenbury.
Oh, yes. Instead of a jamboree, a Fenbury once a year for several years where people get together. And let's tease the audience a little more. We're not going to tell you quite what the ending is yet, but we will tell you that at least 5 people died while searching for this treasure. That came a few years into it, as I recall, and had a sobering effect on some people, not necessarily Mr. Fenn.
So the first death came in 2016, early in 2016, when man Randy Bilyeu was out looking for the treasure in the wintertime, and he drowned in the Rio Grande. And I think at the time, that was obviously a tragic event, and everyone in the search community, a lot of people banded together to try to look for him and try to help him. He was obviously not found alive. But at the time, it was looked at as a fluke, honestly, as in, oh, okay, this one guy died looking for this. It's not a big deal in the larger, more structural sense. The next year, right almost exactly at the time when I got into it, another man died, Paris Wallace, a pastor out of Colorado. And when he died, also in the Rio Grande, it sparked a firestorm. The New Mexico State Police got involved, politicians got involved, a lot of other people did as well, saying, should this thing exist at all? Is this an attractive nuisance? Do we want this to go away? More people are probably going to end up dying the longer we let this thing stay out here. So it became a real open question of, should this treasure hunt exist? Is this the kind of thing we want to be a part of our world? Yes, it quote unquote inspires people and makes them dream on this wonderful thing, and it gives them something to shoot for, but it's also essentially putting people in positions where they are putting themselves in danger because they are so devoted to this quest. They would go out a little bit at the wrong time of year, and then they go and think, oh, the treasure is just over that next hill, so I've got to keep going. And you end up putting yourself in danger. So that was going to keep happening. And in that year, 2017, 3 people died looking for it. And it became a real question about whether it should continue.
Just a quick question. I'm trying to remember. What is the hunt called? What's that called when you're going?
Boots on the ground?
No.
Is that what you're referring to? No? Okay, well.
When somebody says, I don't want to give up my
solve.
My solve, right. Everybody's looking for a solve.
Yes, exactly. And people guard those very zealously. There's a lot of drama around, you shouldn't try to steal another person's solve or take their ideas. There's a lot of proprietary thought that goes into those. So people are very serious about them.
And picking up on the deaths of these explorers who perished, Fenn, over the course of the years, had a number of rationalizations. Among them, 6 or 7 people die every year in Yellowstone Park. They don't close Yellowstone Park. Someone dies in a swimming pool. They don't ban swimming pools. And he tried to he did occasionally try to pull some people back from dangerous areas, saying, look, you don't have to risk your life to find this. It's not, teetering on the edge of a massive waterfall somewhere where you're going to get swept away in the waves.
Right.
But he had a lot of rationalizations, didn't he?
Yeah, he would say.
You sat down and talked to him. You went to his house. You might want to describe where he
Yes, a number of times. Sure. Yeah. I mean, so, one of the things he would say was that, don't go where an 80-year-old man couldn't go, because he was 80 years old when he hid the treasure. And so a lot of people would not listen to that, quite frankly, and would put themselves in danger. As you said, he tried to keep putting out additional, I would say, hints, honestly, because it would try to lead people away from dangerous areas or from doing dangerous things. But there's only so much you can do when people believe they are on the trail of this thing. They're going to do things that are potentially going to put themselves in danger looking for it. But yeah, so I did get to talk to him about all these things and sit down with him. And, going to his house itself is kind of a trip into, Wonderland in so many ways, because Fenn was a very interesting guy. As we said earlier, he was both fighter pilot, art dealer, kind of man about town. And he spent a lot of his life collecting. He was obviously a collector of arts, but he had a real interest in Southwestern, Native American artifacts and antiquities, and an incredible collection of such. And you would go into his house, and his office was just majestic. You would have buffalo heads on one wall, and a fighter box on the other thing, and all his medals are there, and you've got. At one point, he had General Claire Chenault, his Flying Tiger Squadron. He had a jacket for one of their pilots, and just sitting on the wall. I was like, "That's an incredible jacket." He's like, "Oh, go try it on." And I was like, "How much is this thing worth?" It's worth $500,000. He didn't mind me trying it on. I was like, "Okay, I really don't want to mess this thing up." But he liked that. He wanted people to engage with history, and to feel like they were a part of it. So you would go there, and he would just wow you with one thing after another. But of course, I wanted to talk about, hey, why are people dying on your hunt? So, we got into some interesting discussions on those various topics. And he was in a spot where he cared very much that people were dying on his treasure hunt, but he also wanted his treasure hunt to continue. And he didn't want that to be a threat to it, so he had competing interests there.
You said he saw this as a legacy. My guest is Dan Barbarisi. He's a journalist and an author of a new book that comes out, actually be in your stores in about 2 weeks, a little more than 2 weeks.
May 18th, actually. It's very soon. It's out.
10 days.
No. Not even 5 days. 5 days.
If you're watching this live on YouTube or Facebook on our channels, we are coming live to you on Thursday afternoon, my time, Central Time in Mexico. On May 13th, you know that this will remain on Facebook and YouTube for the rest of certainly my life and probably Dan's life. And so I just want you to know that this is live on May 13th, 2021. Dan Barbarisi Books comes out in 5 days. You can pre-order it right now on Amazon. And I've got to tell you, I don't want to in any way deprecate it by saying it's a great beach read, but it's a great beach read. It's a great any read. I mean, I picked it up.
I'm thrilled to be a good beach read. That's wonderful. I want it to be fun.
Exactly. Well, I sometimes have authors on and I have to skim their books because I have other things to do that week. And this book I did not skim. Okay, so you wound up, he had given, by the time you came to him in 2017, he had given hundreds of interviews all over the world, all over the place. He was sort of tired of that. You were surprised that he invited him to your home, and you formed a relationship with him. In fact, one of our listeners named Chasing Indy said, you became friends with him? You saw him? and he says, Chasing Indy says, I'm one of those weirdos. I guess he needs a friend. That's very funny. Thank you, Chasing Indy, for joining us. You can ask a question if you'd like, and I'll pass it along to Dan. So you went to his house a number of times. He lived in a walled compound, and there were some crazies among, I'm sure Chasing Indy isn't one of them, but there were some crazies among these treasure hunters, aren't there?
Yeah, I mean, look, in any enterprise, you're going to have most of the people who are good and normal and everything, and then you're going to have some people who go a little too far. And this certainly had, an element of that. Fenn was very fond of saying that 7% of the people in anything are crazy. And, he said he would refer to the 7%ers a lot of the time in the treasure hunt when things might not go the way he liked or when something would go wrong. He understood that. He dealt with that. And unfortunately, a lot of those incidents with Sagan,
family, though, wasn't it? Rough on his family.
It was. I mean, there were incidences, we were just about to say that, there were instances where people would come to his house, break into his home. People threatened members of his family. One guy believed his granddaughter was the treasure and that essentially killing her was the answer to the thing. So, I mean, there was a lot of rough stuff on his family and on him, and that's a tough part of this. You have this thing where most people are doing everything right and getting the most things out of it. But then you have some people who are just not looking at it the right way, and a few of them who are not right in the head to begin with, like the guy with his granddaughter, unfortunately. So, that was very, very hard on him and hard on his family for sure.
And there was also, and I must admit, I interviewed him for a syndicated radio show I do, I don't know when, several years ago. And there were many people, including a lot of the searchers, the treasure hunters, who didn't believe, maybe it just didn't even exist. Maybe he's just sent everybody on a wild goose chase. This whole thing's a great big hoax. It never exists. He's a bad guy, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to at least consider that possibility. I certainly did when getting into it. I think when I first decided, okay, I'm going to do this book, I spent probably the first part of it, and you see that part in the book, where I basically tried to find enough people close to him and some way to verify that some of this is true. You obviously are going to have to take his word for some of it, and that's okay. But you also have to ask, okay, what's real here, and what can we verify to some extent? And so, I talked to a lot of people who were close to him, and eventually found some people who had watched the chest being filled over the number of years. And there's other ways you can verify that at the very least that thing was sitting in his vault for a good 20 years, and it was coming in, it was getting filled. And, there were other ways, in fact, even some very interesting ways that involved government agencies to verify that this thing was in there at some point. So after that, there's a logic leap of, okay, if he had this chest and he had it full of treasure, you have to believe that he did what he said he did with it. And fortunately, that's a lesser leap. It's okay. He put it somewhere. He did something with all this stuff. And at that point, I was willing to buy into, all right, he probably did some version of what he said he did with it, which is put it out in the wilderness. And then I said, all right, go find it. So at that point, again, you're always going to have a little bit of, I'm just going to believe. But at that point, I felt pretty good that it was actually out there.
All right, let's talk about going to find it, because there are some park rangers still in this world at Yosemite and elsewhere who don't like the search for Fenn, didn't like the search for Fenn's valuables. I mean, people came in and dug up stuff. They walked places they shouldn't have been. And you even once, at least, a couple times, went into a couple places that probably the Park Service wouldn't have been thrilled about. I mean, you actually started searching with your buddy who got you into this, and you got the fever, didn't you?
Yeah, it's funny, you want some level of that when you're doing a book like this. Part of why I was doing it in that way was to have that experience and understand what the quote unquote average hunter is feeling and thinking. But, I got into it more than I expected to. Absolutely. I got a little taken away from it by it. It can be hard not to when you're out there and you're really, in the middle of it. And, you suddenly feel like, whoa, hey, could it actually be here? And you get to these situations and things start to add up for you. And, regardless of the fact that you're nowhere near it in reality, you don't feel that way at the time. It can really start to take hold. And in that, you'll push yourself to go, all right, well, what if we go over there? We're not really supposed to go off the path. It's okay. It's fine. Fenn would want us to go there. Fenn wants people to explore different things and check out new stuff. So, you make certain rationalizations to yourself, and, you make yourself do certain things that, again, you probably shouldn't do. Unfortunately, we didn't get into real trouble, but, there are obviously incidents where people did. And that's part of the good and the bad of this. There's very good things about this hunt. There's also things that reality is it makes people do things that are not so good sometimes. So it's all part of it.
And that was part of his, on the positive side of his rationalization for doing this, to get people away from the televisions and away from their video games, out into nature, because this was clearly somewhere near the Rocky Mountains. It was outside. And the idea was to get people to have a little challenge in their life, have a little excitement in their life, get outside, breathe the fresh air. That played well with the media. Of course, then the deaths started happening, and much of the media turned against him, saying, stop this. This is, we're losing lives over this. But it was still, I'm fascinated by subcultures. Mm-hmm. I'll digress for a minute. When I was in college, I filled out an application to be a summer intern at the Washington Post. Mm-hmm. And I wound up not only going there the day after my last final at Ohio University, I wound up staying there as investigative reporter and magazine writer and columnist and stuff for 11 years. And 10 years into being at the Washington Post, somebody from HR, Human Resources, brought down my application. And it said, what are your interests? And I said, con men, rogues, and hustlers.
There you go.
And
hustlers, I know you found one of those, specifically with a capital H.
But you had all of them. You had con men, you had rogues, you had hustlers in this. But it's also a subculture. And I'm fascinated by subculture. People who have their own rules that nobody else knows about. And they're incredibly passionate about it, and it's life or death sometimes. And that's the world you were in with these people who were so intense and so sometimes backstabbing and sometimes cooperative. But it must have been an intense world, because you were part of it. You weren't just interviewing people. You were there. They were, at one point, somebody floated a rumor that it was all arranged for you to find it, so that,
yes.
Get big publicity because famous journalist finds treasure. Yeah. You lived in that stuff. And you saw those people. Did any of them seek professional help ever that you know of?
I'm sure some have. Not necessarily connected to this. I don't know. But yes, to me, certainly exploring and understanding those subcultures is a big part of this. And, I totally agree that that's what you want to be in, is something where it has its own community, its own understanding, its own, as you said, rules, regulations, strictures, dialogue, and, nomenclature, all of it. All that stuff is so cool, when these things develop. And, I was lucky enough to come into it after it had some time to percolate. And so, it wasn't ground floor, because, that's fine to get into something, but you want to be after it's had a little time to develop and kind of come into its own. And, there end up being kind of personalities who are more well-known in, quote unquote, celebrity types within that world. And, various relationships that have gone on for years, and love and hate and all that kind of stuff. And it's incredible to dive into that and see, how it all developed. Now, in this particular instance, it was even more interesting because it's all around one man, right. Forrest Fenn. It's not just a community which exists in, one big circle. There's something at the middle of that circle, and that's Fenn. And so, he in so many ways drove everything here, and one thing I thought about that was really interesting is just that you're going to become obsessed with this treasure. You want to find the box. You have to become obsessed with Forrest Fenn. I don't know if he designed it that way per se, but that's the reality of it. If you wanted to be somebody who really took this thing seriously, you had to know all about this guy. And you had to understand, what he was doing at 15 years old and what his brother was thinking back then, all the myths and tales of his past.
Where he fished.
Yeah, very much where he fished. Absolutely. All the myths and tales of his past were part and parcel of finding this treasure. And so, it's funny because, it creates, whether he intended to or not, it creates a cult of personality around him, because you have to know all about him to be a part of this. And so knowledge of him and access to him become very, very, very valuable commodities within this, and people wanted access to him. We mentioned the Fenn Berets and all that. There's almost like a receiving line at one point in these where you would get a chance to have your little bit of time with Fenn, and, and Fenn would bestow some words of wisdom on you. And almost everybody took away from that, oh, he told me something that was valuable about my solve. And, obviously that was not the case for everyone, but he gave them that feeling. He made people feel important. He was very good at that. He had a real skill to it. He was a salesman and a showman for a very long time, and he was truly good at it. So he really had the ability to make people feel special, and he used it here.
Well, chasing Indy, who was clearly was in the Fenn fan club, said the story has consumed his life. All I want is the story. And he says in all caps, are we ever going to get closure? Chase the Indian, we're going to get closure on this webcast very soon. Well, a lot of closure. I have a feeling he might not have read your piece in Outside Magazine.
I'm sure he has.
You think he has? Chasing
Yes. I feel pretty confident that he's read that piece if he's this involved. And
did you read Dan's piece in Outside Magazine? If so, you've had some closure. But for those of you who are new to this, you're wondering, did anybody ever find it? Okay, you thought it was in Utah.
No, I definitely did not think it was in Utah. Utah's actually not in the search area. I thought I was, first of all, I was a terrible treasure hunter, for the record. I thought primarily it was in New Mexico. My hunting partner thought it was in Wyoming. Turned out he was right. I was definitely not. But again, I was not a very good treasure hunter, all things considered. But no, I mean, so yes, we certainly went searching for it in all the search states, and had various hijinks and all that. But no, I don't think I was ever particularly close to it.
Okay, chasing Indy, by the way, is a woman. I've been referring using the masculine pronoun. She says, laugh out loud. She's a lady. She's a weirdo looking into conspiracies. All right, should we give the? I mean, we have more to talk about, but should we say that last year the treasure was found?
Yes, it certainly was.
2020, June of 2020, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
By a guy who, I guess, you knew many of the colorful characters who were most active in social media and who had started YouTube channels. He was not one of those, I gather. Who was he? No. Who found it? Where did he find it generally? And what happened when he found it?
Oof, that's a lot there. Okay, so the short version, in June of 2020, as you said, an announcement was made that the treasure had been found. Forrest Fenn put out there.
Fenn announced.
Yes, Fenn announced that the treasure had been found.
Right.
Effectively, a little more than that, but essentially that's right. That the treasure had been found, and it had been found by a man from back east, and he did not give a lot more detail than that. And everything went crazy. Everything went absolutely crazy. Initially there was a lot of doubt, a huge amount of doubt, actually. That this isn't real. Fenn is just trying to end the hunt. Right. We don't believe this and this and that. Fenn put out some additional proof, but that really wasn't enough for a lot of people. He showed some pictures, and then eventually in July, he revealed that the treasure was found in Wyoming. So again,
where have most people been searching, Dan? What states?
Interestingly, I had some numbers on that. Nothing's perfect in this, but I did have some, and there's ways to bifurcate it. There's New Mexico, there's Wyoming, there's the Yellowstone parts of Wyoming, and then there's the non-Yellowstone parts of Wyoming. There's essentially the parts of Montana that border Wyoming. All of those were highly searched areas. Colorado, generally speaking, was less so, was probably the least of that, unless you want to count Wyoming as different parts. But anyway, those are generally the areas where people were searching. With I think Yellowstone and New Mexico were generally speaking the most searched. But they were all up there. In any case,
you ever go to Wyoming?
Oh yeah, yep. Absolutely. I've been on searches in all the search states. So, my search partner had a pretty good solve in Wyoming, and that's certainly in there. But there was a lot of different places to adventure and look for this thing. So, so after that, that helped a little, but not a lot, and it gave closure to some people, but not many, honestly. And then in September of 2020, Forrest Fenn died. And that kind of left the open question about what we would ever know about this.
He did not reveal who had found it.
No. He said that the finder wanted to remain anonymous, and there's a lot of
Before you tell us, Adam Foddy is watching. He said, "Was it found by Dan's search partner?" I was right. Jack was his search partner. Boom. Jack was not your search partner.
Definitely not. No. No, my search partner was Jay Rayner, known as Beep I'm a Jeep in various corners of the world, and a very well-known fantasy sports player, actually, who was, again, my mentor in my last book. So in the end part of September 2020, a couple of weeks after Fenn had died, a post showed up on the website Medium. And it was by somebody who was purporting to be the finder of the treasure. And this person had a lot of information that really only the finder would have, or somebody connected to Fenn very closely. And a lot of people instantly said, "Oh, this is false. This is fake. This is, whatever, yada, yada, yada." I didn't think that at all. I thought, oh, this guy is talking like somebody who has been out there, who understands this thing, who has searched for it and quested for it and yearned for it. And it rang really true to me. And so I wanted to get in touch with this person. But Medium doesn't really let you do that. That's part of why it's such a good anonymous publishing platform, because there's no way to contact the author. You can put your name in the comments, But if you do that and like be like, hey, email me, there's no guarantee at all that the person who gets back to you is actually the person who wrote the thing. It could be just anybody else who wrote the comment. So that's not a good strategy. That's not going to help you. So I figured out a way to contact the author directly, which is that basically you have to flag a portion of somewhere in the story, flag it basically saying there's a typo, and then it gives you a little bit of room to say who you are, or say here's what your typo. But I use that to say, I'm Dan Barbarisi, I'm writing this book, hopefully you've heard of me and what I'm doing, please get in touch with me. And fortunately he actually had. And so like a day later, I got an email from a very treasure related email address that basically said, I saw you contacted me, I might be willing to talk to you, but I'm very skeptical about the whole thing. I was like, oh, okay. So that kind of started months of back and forth with me and this anonymous person who did not tell me who he was, as I basically negotiated with him and we discussed, all the things about the treasure hunt, and eventually got him to essentially agree to talk to me. But I still didn't know who he was. And so then, yeah.
Let me interrupt you for a minute. For those who aren't deep into this, as a couple of our viewers are, they might be asking themselves, well, why? I mean, if I found it, I'd be in the front of the newspaper. I'd shout it to the world. What were the drawbacks that you guys, you men and women who thought about it so much, what were the possible drawbacks of saying, look, here it is. I got it right here. Here's $1 million right here.
Right.
Possible drawbacks.
Well, I mean, there could be a lot of them. Look, if you find this thing, in some ways you could put a target on your own back. I mean, a lot of people who were really into it, and maybe some who were a little bit too into it, could redirect some unhappiness towards you. And there are a lot of people who are going to question, well, how did you get it? Was it on the up and up? What was done here? Is everything right? Did this person steal it from me or from somewhere else or something like that? Or did they come by it unfairly? There's been a lot of that kind of talk. And then there's the reality of, you have come into some version of wealth and people may resent that. There's, a lot of reasons why a finder might want to be anonymous. And I think a lot of people understood that about this.
There were tax considerations. There were.
That's not really the issue, honestly. It certainly wasn't in this case. So
but apparently, if you found it on government property, if you found it in national park service,
there's a lot of questions about what type of property, and that does govern some of the tax statutes here. But that stuff has essentially been taken care of, and that wasn't a reason for anonymity in this case. It was about the idea that there was concern about whether that would put the person who found it in danger, honestly, or complicate their life unnecessarily in ways that nobody wanted. So he wanted to remain anonymous, but there were some factors that were going to push against that. One of them was that there were some lawsuits filed in the wake of the find, and actually some that existed before that, basically saying, various versions of, I don't think this is legitimate. The finder stole the find for me. I deserve the treasure all along, that kind of stuff. Those, you could make arguments about how far those were ever going to go. But at one point, one of them did go far enough, at least, that the names of the parties involved were going to come out in court. And that was going to essentially end up likely naming the finder eventually. And so he let me know that was happening. And, once we talked about that, I was like, hey, so if your name's going to come out anyway at some point, do you mind if I just tell the world who you are and write about it and kind of explain that to everyone? I mean, he said, all right, I guess so. So I was able to write in December in that Outside Magazine article that you referenced, kind of say, all right, this is the guy who found it. And his name was Jack Stoof, and he was a medical student from Michigan. And he was the one, at the time, 32 years old. And he was actually the one who found the treasure and went and had located it and got it and, had the treasure chest. So, he was the guy.
And he said he did it by getting into the mind of Forrest Fenn, by reading the several books he'd written, by trying to look at the world through Fenn's eyes, basically. Yeah,
I mean, I think one of the things he said to me at one point was, it required a really good English major's reading of the book and the poem. But just what we talked about before, it's the idea that, you really have to know and understand Fenn. That's what's going to get you to this treasure. And, that's what he did. He sought to really live in the man's head and understand what mattered to him and try to bring out what the special spot was where he wanted to die, this place that was important enough and valuable enough to him that, he was willing to do that. So, that's really the road he followed in so many ways.
But why the one thing that is not known, and I'm sure Chase Indy and Adam Fody know this, the one thing that hasn't been revealed is where exactly in Wyoming this was found and why it was placed where it was. Do we know either the first, we don't know where. We know why it was placed where it was.
Well, yeah, I mean that's the space, that's the place
Where
that
he might
Fenn wanted to go and die. Yeah, I mean that's effectively it.
But we don't know why he wanted to die there. Was it a place he used to trout fish? Was it, did he?
That's not stuff I'm, either honestly in full knowledge of or would really talk about if I were. So, that's the kind of stuff that Jack wants to keep to himself.
Why is he keeping it? Why is the finder keeping the whereabouts?
Well, I mean, his argument would be that this is essentially going to become a tourist trap if, people found out exactly where it was. And the reason he found it was that it was a spot that was special to Forrest Fenn. And, he believes that he is, doing right by Fenn and by the spot by essentially keeping it secure from people who might not go there with bad intentions necessarily, but just, treat it as a pilgrimage site and, go there and not just the number of people who would be involved would probably end up, not making it the special place it was in some ways.
What knocks me out is that upon finding it, he covered it back up with pine needles and leaves and so on, and went back to his car and apparently went home for the night or to a motel for the night, called Fenn and said, "Look, I found it. Here's the description. I found it. Haven't I?" And Fenn said, "Yes. Can I go get it?" Given the number of people like Chasing Indy and Adam Foddy on this particular webcast, the number of people after it I would have been petrified leaving it overnight. Who knows who was going to see it an hour later?
I think I would have too, but I think, he recognized that after being out looking for this thing for so long, and, having been in his spot for so long and not really seeing people and understanding, the level of remoteness there, that there wasn't really a danger that somebody was just going to happen upon it in that time period. So, that obviously that took me by huge surprise too when he told me that. But, essentially when you have been in the situation as he had, you kind of see that, all right, it's not just like somebody's walking down the street going to see this thing, it's not quite like that. So,
I think have you met the finder? Excuse me.
I mean, I have communicated with him on a, internet basis. We have never stayed in the same room. We have looked at each other, et cetera.
On a video?
Yes.
How would you describe his demeanor and personality? Is he a geeky guy? Is he a regular Joe? Is he?
I wouldn't say he's either of those things. He is you have to be a little bit of a different kind of person to find this thing and to be the kind of person who's going to be committed enough to your solution and to your belief that you are right. To spend all that time looking for it and to not be deterred by various factors. And, I think Jack would tell you himself, he is a stubborn person. Right. He is a single-minded person. He can get very fixated on things. He can get very devoted to things. He's also had some interesting life experiences. I think you were, he's been, he's been in Washington media, I believe, as I think you were. He's done some interesting things in his life and gone back and forth. He worked for The Onion at various points. He's done some different stuff. So, he sees the world in a slightly different way, I think, than not everybody else, but than some people. And, in this instance, I think that served him very well. So, I say I think he's an interesting guy, and I think that sounds like it's underselling it, but I don't think it does.
Adam, here's a couple of questions. Adam wants to know, is Dan aware of any others that might know the location? Someone, a viewer named Granite Granny says, it's fake and Jack is under contract. Dan, these arguments about stalkers, et cetera, is tired and worn out.
Sorry.
Granite Granny, I'm sure all the three people we're referring to the most are going to be reading this book, but are you aware of anyone else that knows the location? Maybe
there are other people who know the location now. They are all either very close to Jack or close to Fenn.
Close to Fenn? Who were close to Fenn?
Close to Jack would be a good way to say it, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Your book comes out. You are going to be doing a lot. I'm honored that you did this, a few days early with us, because you are going to be swamped with interviews because there's so many people who followed it. It really did. It came in and out of the news over the years. The book is called Chasing the Thrill. You can see it there. Obsession, Death, and Glory in America's Most Extraordinary Treasure Hunt by a Boston area-based journalist, Daniel Barbarisi. Daniel, I know you're... I once left my wife when she was pregnant for something that we don't have to go into now that some would deem frivolous. You did that once, and your wife was kind enough to let you go. I'm delighted to hear you're still married.
Yes, twice, in fact. I mean, I've made various trips on this thing when, in 2017 and in, 2019, both when I had kids coming in a couple of weeks. And so she was wonderful enough to let me actually go on these various trips and follow this story and chase this whole thing down. So, it was a blast to be a part of, honestly. And yes, I'm very lucky that my wonderful wife, Emily, has let me do these various things and go on these various adventures. So, I consider myself very fortunate.
Not only is it an incredible story, it's very, very well written, and it keeps you hanging on and wanting to turn the page one after another as fast as you can. Dan Barbarisi, thank you so much for stopping by. I was just thinking today, great luck on your book. Again, you can pre-order it right now on Amazon.com, and it'll be out in bookstores any day now. 5 days at the very most, probably. Congratulations. Good luck on the media tour that's going to follow. And that's a lot of hard work. By the way, at what point during your involvement did you get a book contract?
I think that was 2018. No, so I mean, the way these things work, you kind of go and do a lot of the legwork beforehand.
All right.
And then once you've got the nut of something good, you go and actually do it. So
your editor, when he or she, it's a he, I know. What did you say to your editor when he said, Dan, what if nobody ever finds this? What's the ending of your book?
Yeah, I mean, the original ending I had, I actually kind of finished a draft of it basically in the first week of June 2020. And then it was like, oh, God, I was like, oh, no. And so I had to rip up the last 3 chapters of the book pretty quickly.
How did you convince him to give you a contract without a find?
Well, because it wasn't about that. It wasn't about who finds the treasure, frankly. That ended up being a pretty darn good ending. And I was extremely lucky that the timing worked out that way. But that's not what it's about to me. It's about what comes when you drop a treasure hunt into the modern world. What are all the things that come out of that? What are the unintended consequences? What are the things it makes people do? What are the things that makes people think? All that stuff. I mean, that's what to me was really interesting. It wasn't about finding a treasure, just in the same way that it's not about the value of the treasure, the money to the people who are looking for it. It's not about that, So that was never a thing that was, look, it gave me a great ending. I was very happy that it happened on the timeline that it did. But the book was going to end one way or another. So that's not a huge thing I was concerned about. So
you were just lucky. You were a good journalist as well to get someone who wants to remain anonymous to eventually open up. Congratulations on that.
And by the way, one thing, since people do take every detail in this very seriously, I actually did not understand the question you were asking a couple minutes ago. I don't know actually if other people close to Jack know for sure where it is. I know I know that they were looking that he knew generally where they were looking, but that doesn't mean I know where where he was actually going. So I don't want to step out of turn there. I didn't quite understand what you were asking there. So I'm not exactly sure about that part.
All right. Now I will leave you with Chasey Indy, who wants to know if you have a spot for another YouTube interview. Chasey Indy, I suggest you contact Dan's publisher, who is, who's your publisher?
Penguin Random House. So the people, that's where we're over at Penguin Random House. Yes, Jess Purcell over at Knopf.
Online, there's a number for a PR person. Call him and see if you can book it. He's going to be a popular guy very soon. There you are. Congratulations again, Dan. Thanks for stopping by this afternoon and chatting with us. Great book.
All right. Thank you, Rudy. I appreciate it.
And thank you to all of you who tuned in. And if you're watching later on YouTube and Rudy Maxa's World fan page, good for you. Delighted to have you here. We'll see you again in about 2 weeks. I know who I'm having, but I'm not going to tell you quite yet. Just stick around or sign up for my newsletter. You can find out how to do that by going to Instagram, look for Rudy Maxa, and there's a link on my bio. I publish a free newsletter every 2 weeks. It has a lot of travel tips, and I'll also alert you to who's coming up on these webcasts. Until then, I think I'm going to go out there in the water and get a little salt on my skin and finish this bottle of very good Mexican red wine. Take care.